Hi, I'm Sean here from the Lights Camera Pro podcast, and I'm here with Berry, who has the Mommy Oyoyo podcast, and I am interviewing her today, and she's telling us all about her podcast and all the people she interviews internationally, all over the world, and what it's like to be a mom. And so, my first question, which she did that you couldn't hear, was, "How did you come up with the podcast?" And then, how did you come up with the name Mommy El Yo-Yo? Sorry, you have to do that again, but go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna give the short version.
Yes,
So my name is
yes.
Berry Dakara. I'm Nigerian and I live in Atlanta. The short version is a few years ago, I think 2016, I shared publicly on YouTube and on my blog that I was trying to conceive and get pregnant with my husband. And after I put out that post, I got so many messages from other women, Nigerian women, African women, across the world saying, "Oh, wow, thank you so much for talking about it publicly because we're not allowed to talk about such things." African culture is more of, we will celebrate the highs, but then we have to hide the lows and hide the struggles. And so a lot of women were like, "Oh, thank God I'm not alone. You're also in this with me." And I've actually made a few friends just from that post alone. But that just kind of triggered something within me to be more vocal and to give other women a voice to talk about different things. And I knew I didn't want to do another blog, to have another blog, because, sometimes I just get tired of writing.
Yeah.
And it just felt like talking would be easier. I like listening to podcasts, and my original intent was to have a podcast and talk to other women in about 15, 20 minutes, although a lot of my episodes are like an hour long now.
Mm,
But that's where the idea was birthed from. I had the idea for the podcast itself in 2018, and it took me, like, I just, on a particular day, I'm like, you know what, if I had a podcast and wanted to come up with topic ideas, like how many could I come up with? And I just freestyled, and the next thing I knew, I had 40 different ideas for episodes. And I'm like, hey, I think I may have something here. I posted that on Instagram. People reached out like, "Oh my God, I think you should do it." Someone asked, "Do you
right.
have the domain name? Do you have the Instagram?" I'm like, no, I'm still just thinking about it. She's like, "It doesn't matter, just buy it." So I bought the domain. I got the Instagram, I got the Gmail address, and then for the next 8 months, sat on the idea of, well, I just want it to be perfect. Well, I need the best mic. Well, I need the best podcast host system. Well, I need this. Well, I need that. And for 8 months, that's all I did. I need. I want it to be perfect. And then one day in June of last year, I'm like, you know what? I keep saying I want, and I haven't done anything. I've been making all these plans and not done anything, period. So here's Anchor. My friend had told me about Anchor. I'm like, here's Anchor. I can create an episode right here and then. And I put my daughter to bed. The next thing, I recorded an episode, I published it, and I told everyone, "Hi guys, I have a podcast. It's called Mommy Oyoyo. You should go listen." So
Yeah.
that's how I started the podcast. And then the name comes from this phrase that neighborhood kids would say when their moms would come home, like when I lived back in Nigeria. It was "Mommy, oh yo yo, mommy, oh yo yo, mommy, oh yo yo," like just excited that mommy has come home from work or the market
Okay.
or wherever it is. I don't know if it's an actual language, but I really like the name. And when other Nigerians hear the name of the podcast, it's like, "Oh, that's so cool." So that's the
Right,
name.
because they
That's where
recognize
the name
it.
comes. Right, exactly.
That's very cool. And I just wanted to mention, like I did before, that Anchor is so cool because I interviewed a couple yesterday from Queens, and they did the same thing, and they wanted to start a podcast, and they didn't have a lot of money, and they just said, "I heard about this Anchor thing. I'm going to try it." And a lot of people do it because it's free, and
Yeah.
you can get your own ads on there, and it just automatically works. You don't have to sign up with a hosting service. I do Libsyn, and I bought some, not crazy equipment, but some equipment. But look at me right now. I'm using these headphones when I have expensive headphones because they work better for the live.
There
So,
you go.
so there you go. So it is so cool. You were telling me before we went live that you interview a lot of international women.
Yes.
And so tell me about that, and talk about how it's, you're talking to mothers and African mothers, and about raising your kids and all that.
Right. So, I have interviewed now, I think about 21 different guests. Coincidentally, though, my first guest was a guy. It was a guy
Ah, okay.
talking about fatherhood because, some of you dads are not very, very active
Yeah.
with raising the children. And I know a friend of mine who's very active, and I wanted to have him on the podcast. So he was my first guest. But most of my guests have been actually, I don't think I've actually had a guest that lives in Atlanta. Most of my guests have been either in Nigeria or in the UK. I may have had someone in Canada as well, but like the time difference is always jarring. Nigeria is either 5 to 6 hours ahead of us. England's about 5 hours, depending on
Hmm.
whether it's daylight savings time or not. And a lot of the guests are just, regular moms, just like me, who have one story or another to tell. I've spoken to women about divorce, about being a single mom, trying to conceive, having endometriosis, homeschooling in Africa, just all kinds of different topics that weren't even on my list that I initially wrote. But
Right.
it's been really, really interesting to get all these different women, and I'm looking forward to just making it even more. I'm looking forward to it being much bigger than it is right now. I think we're still in the starting stages, the beginning stages, but
Okay.
I'm looking forward to a lot of growth.
Awesome. And you were saying that at one point you had to do an interview at 1:30 in the morning?
Yes. So
What
so let me tell you
was
this.
that?
Okay.
What happened there?
So I actually have a guest on. I've had a guest on my podcast who she also has a podcast, but she only records at 6 a.m. on Saturday mornings, Eastern time. I,
Mm,
on the other hand, I work with my guest schedule. So when they say, "Oh, so when do you want to record?" I'm like, "Well, it depends
yes.
on you because I know you're a mom. I know that you're busy, and I know that you probably want to have your kids." Being taken care of and not knocking on the door like, mommy, mommy,
Right, right.
So what is your schedule like? And this one girl, she says, listen, I wake up at this time. I think it's like 7 a.m. No, 6 a.m. Nigerian time. That's the only time that I can do this interview. And I'm like, okay, so that's gonna be 1 o'clock my time, 1 a.m. And she's like, yeah, sorry, that's the only time that I have. Like, okay, sure, no problem, we'll do it. And I set my alarm for 12:30, 1:30. I woke up and I'm like, oh my God. But the thing about it is, I love what I'm doing so much, so I don't mind that sacrifice. I
Yeah.
really don't. I've recorded at midnight before because a mom here in the States, she's on the eastern coast as well. Um, the plan was to record our episode at 10 o'clock at night. And then at 10 o'clock, she's like, my child hasn't gone to bed yet. I'm like, well, me either. And that's what happened until it was midnight. And like, are you still awake? Yeah, my child just went to bed. Okay, let's go record the episode.
No, I actually heard about there's one guy who records in his car because he has kids in the house
Yeah,
and he just has a little Zoom recorder or maybe he uses his phone with Anchor. And then there's a woman who records in her closet because the same
yeah.
thing, because the kids keep coming in when she's doing her podcast. So that's funny. So, how do you find your guests? Do they find you or do you actively look for them? That's a big question on the Facebook boards. How do you find your guests?
A lot of my guests are friends of mine or friends of friends.
Okay.
So if I know someone that I think has a story to tell, that doesn't mind going public with their story, I'll say,
Hmm.
"Hey, you want to be on my podcast?" And they a lot of times they'll say yes. I've had a couple of no's, but more often than not, I'll get the yeses.
Right.
I also find people on social media. Like for instance, I saw a friend of mine today shared a book that was written by a Nigerian woman who had a child through surrogacy. That's not a topic that I've covered on the podcast yet. So I asked my friend, hey, can you introduce me to her? And so now we're working on getting that introduction done and having her on the podcast. So there's a lot of um, looking for people on social media, but also using the contacts that I have to help me find people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's always, I mean, you kind of have an open-ended subject, mothers with their children. So, I mean, you could just go on and on for 20 years with that. Some people have
Amen.
very specific, some people have very specific subjects, and they're like, I can't find any guests, and will you be a guest on my show, and all this kind of stuff. So, how do you promote your podcast, Barry? Do you use a lot of social media, or what do you do to help people find it?
It's mostly on social media, using Instagram mostly. I have an Instagram page for the Mommy Oyoyo podcast and my Berry Dakara podcast as well. Berry Dakara Instagram handle. So most of my listeners come from my personal Instagram.
Okay.
When I post on Instagram that, hey, I have a podcast episode up, then they'll go listen. So I use Instagram mostly. On Facebook, I remember maybe every other episode to to promote on Facebook. Even on my WhatsApp um, contact list, I'll share
Hmm.
it there as well. I have a Twitter account, but Twitter is stressful. Twitter is very, very stressful. I just
Why is it
don't.
stressful? I'm just curious. I don't really like it either, but
It's fine for me to go and consume other people's content, but I don't want
mm,
to write tweets and wait for someone to retweet or like I don't have that
yeah.
energy. And I have another friend who's a podcaster as well. She uses her blog to promote her podcast, and it's amazing because she has a lot of readers. I don't use my blog to promote, not as much as I should. I know
Hmm.
that I'd have a lot more listens, but I don't know. I just kind
But
of want to separate the two brands.
okay, because
Yeah.
I do remember seeing on your Facebook page that you hit 5,000 downloads at one point,
Yes. Now I have 5,000 downloads.
which
Yes.
is great. Congratulations. Not
You-
everybody does that. Not everybody does that quickly. Some people just have 10 people a month or something. I
Yeah.
have about 700 downloads in 2 months now, but I did see a big increase. I was posting to my Facebook page, like you have a Facebook page for your
Mm,
podcast.
yeah.
But then I also shared it to my timeline. And that actually, a lot of people, same thing. They were friends of mine who saw it and were
Right.
like, oh, I'm going to check this out. So I was missing out on that audience in the first month. So I've added that. I've added Instagram. I've added Twitter. Um, what is the other one? LinkedIn. So actually, LinkedIn, I've been
Yeah.
posting my podcasts, and there's a very good response on LinkedIn.
Funny enough,
Um,
I have put up a couple of posts on LinkedIn. But for me, there's this like but for LinkedIn is for professional stuff, it's for like career stuff, like
mhm.
how do I share my podcast? Like, will people take me seriously? But someone who's very into LinkedIn networking says that you can share your podcast or share whatever it is, your side hustle as a passion project, as something that you're working on, because you are gaining skills as a podcaster, whether it's through producing or editing or marketing and promotions. You're doing all of that stuff. So you can add that as a passion project, and these are the skills that you're learning um, and put it up on LinkedIn. So I've done that a couple of times. I need to do one. I think I'm going to do that next week. When next week is my 1 year anniversary of being a podcaster, so I'll do that
Okay,
then. Yeah,
cool.
thank you.
Very cool. So it's interesting. I don't know if it's interesting. I'm going to say it is, but for me, I think I want to work on podcasts. So I was a video editor, or have been. I'm still freelancing for television, for Turner, and advertising for 25 years. And now I've been doing this
Wow.
podcast thing for a year, and and I think I want to do it. I think I want to be a podcast producer or work with growing audiences. I've applied for several jobs. I really like this podcasting. I love podcasts in general, but
Right.
I'm also really enjoying this video podcast thing. So, do you think that you'll do a video podcast someday, like promote it on Zoom or put it on YouTube or anything like that?
I would like to. The biggest challenge really is getting the interviews, the timing right. Because like I said, I've had to wake up at 1:30 in the morning before. I've had
Hmm.
to record at midnight before. Am I gonna get dressed at that time? Will I have my
Yeah.
will I have my wig on and my makeup
Or
on? Do I
maybe,
want to do
right,
that at that time?
right, but or maybe just do it sometimes. You don't have to when it works. You know what I mean? It might be fun. Like this has been a lot of fun to actually see the people I'm interviewing rather
Hmm.
than just talk to them. It's very very different. And like you said, we're
Yeah,
like, okay, we're going live. This is also live. We could do this offline, not live,
right.
and just record it. So it's kind of fun to be live too. So, what is the future? I'll ask you two questions, and
Hmm.
you can wrap it up if you want. I know you have a kid and stuff to do. Um, what is the future for the Mommy Oyoyo podcast, and what advice would you give for new podcasters? Like, just do it or use Anchor. Like, what would you say to new podcasters, and what do you see as the future of your podcast?
The future of the podcast really is I really want to take it offline and have events for African moms across the world. I had actually planned this COVID pandemic has just upended everything that I
Yes.
planned for
Yeah.
the podcast. I was gonna have a CPR training class here in Atlanta so that other moms could learn how to do CPR in case, your children need it or someone at home.
Mhm.
I was gonna do that in I think March or April, but then that got canceled. And then I was supposed to be traveling to Canada next week, and I was gonna have just an offline event for my listeners over there in Canada. And obviously, I'm not in Canada, and COVID isn't letting me travel anywhere. But eventually, I would like to not just have it as a podcast, but kind of like a networking platform for other moms to just get in touch with each other and talk to each other and give each other support. That's what this whole podcast is for, really, to support African moms,
No,
right?
I think that's a really great idea. And sorry to interrupt, but I've been thinking about because I love podcasts so much to do a conference. You know how they have the conferences where people go and all the podcasters come together and they talk and take
Yeah.
classes and they have speakers. Well, there's nothing like that in Atlanta. There's one in Orlando. There's one in Texas. And
Hmm.
it's kind of a crazy idea to put one of those together, and it would have to be after we have a vaccine. But
Right.
I just had this idea, and it's for you to
I'm
do
coming.
some sort of meeting conference
Coming.
thing.
I'm coming.
What?
I'm
Oh, you're
coming.
coming? Okay,
Ready.
yeah, come. Definitely come to the podcast conference. But also, I'm saying for you, it'd be really cool to have some sort of convention conference where all the moms from all over the world come and you're in charge of it and
Exactly.
you call it the Mommy Oyoyo podcast or whatever, and you could start small in a local hotel and only have like 50 people. And then podcast movement, which is this podcast, they raised money on Indiegogo or one of these, I forget what it's called, like the sites where you raise money,
Hmm.
and Kickstarter,
Okay.
and they
Okay.
raised
Yeah.
like $10,000, $15,000 to pay for the conference. So they didn't pay for it with their own money.
Oh,
They just
wow.
went online and said, we want to start this conference. So if you went online, and eventually I'm going to try and do it too, you go online and say, we're going to have this conference. It's the Mommy Oyoyo conference. It's for all moms from all over the world to come and meet each other and talk about ideas and spend a week.
That would be awesome.
That would be so cool.
I've actually thought about something like that. It's going to be the Mommy Oyoyo movement, MOM. So still mom as well.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Very, very cool. So sorry,
Yeah.
I interrupted you. But I just had to tell you that idea because I have these silly ideas all the time.
They're not
Um,
silly. They're not silly. I think
okay.
it's a great
Well,
idea.
hopefully someday I'll get an email or a text from you saying we're doing the conference, and I'll send you mine.
Amen to
So
that.
last, yeah. So last bit of advice for new podcasters. What would you say?
My first piece of advice would be just start. You don't need the fancy equipment. You don't need the
Okay.
fancy microphones. You don't need to have like editing, top-notch editing skills, all of those things. Just start where you are because you can plan forever and nothing gets done at all. Nothing.
Yeah.
So just start. If you have a few ideas for your episodes, go ahead, record them, tell everybody that you know that you have a podcast, and take it from there. You will learn as time goes on. You will improve on things as time goes on.
Yeah.
That's my number one piece of advice. Just start.
Yeah, and I think it's something that really everybody should just do because it's a creative outlet and you meet
Mhm.
people and you network. There's so many benefits to podcasting. People are constantly posting like, how many downloads do you have and how much money have you made? And it's not about that at all.
Not,
It's a
yeah, it's
it's
definitely
about
not about
connecting
the
with
money.
people and
What I like to tell
networking.
people is that you need to be passionate about what you're talking about on your podcast. Because if it's about the money, you're going to be very, very disappointed. If it's about, oh, I want to
Hmm.
have like 20 million downloads in 2 days. Yeah, good luck with that. I mean, very few people get that number, that those high numbers.
Yeah,
It's once in a very, very long time. So if that's what's driving you, is the numbers, or if it's the money, yeah, maybe go find something else to do. But if you're
yeah,
passionate about what you're talking about, then no matter what is happening, no matter how little money you're making, at least you'll be willing to sacrifice your time. Um, Maybe not sacrifice all the money that you have, but you'll be willing to sacrifice some things to keep the podcast going. I'm actually with Anchor. I put in the sponsorship thingy,
right.
and it's $15 cost per mil, which is $15 for every 1,000 listens. People, the very first time I heard about cost per mil, I was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm only
Right.
getting, like 100 downloads per episode. Like, what are you telling me? But at least, hey, I've gotten up to $26 now. I remember when I had 1 cent a couple of months ago. At least now I have $26. Hey,
Exactly, you made something.
I made
But yeah,
something.
it's really not about the money. But this has been a pleasure. You are so nice. You're so easy to talk to, and I wish you the
Uh,
best of luck with your podcast.
Thank you.
And I hope that someday you do a Mommy Yo-Yo convention. And
Amen
I
to
can't
that.
come, but have fun.
Thank
All
you.
right, well, you have a great night, Barry. Have a good night.
You too. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye.